It's now my pleasure to introduce the first keynote speaker today, Pavan Sukhdev.
Meet Pavan Sukhdev, a sustainability thought leader, innovator, influencer, and the former special advisor and head of UNEP's Green Economy Initiative. Pavan founded GIST Advisory, a sustainability consulting firm measuring and valuing business impacts across all SDGs. Pavan has served on many NGO boards, including Conservation International, Stockholm Resilience Center, and GRI, and is now president of the board at WWF International.
Let's see if we have Pavan with us here. There you are, Pavan. Wonderful to have you with us. You have our full attention for your keynote. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and warmest greetings from me on World Environment Day. It's a special World Environment Day because it is 2020, so we are supposed to be bringing vision to this day because it's 2020. It's a special day because sadly we are suffering, all of us, huge consequences and huge tragedies around almost every country in the world due to COVID, and that originated due to our lack of living in harmony with nature. So I think never before has it been more obvious that nature matters, that we are part of nature, and that we need to do our bit. We need to be responsible in how we interact with nature, not to destroy it, but actually preserve it, live within it, and not try to be a dominant force, trying to convert the Holocene era in which we are today into what we call the Anthropocene, one in which outcomes on the surface of the planet are determined by humanity as a geological force. So we have a lot on our shoulders, and frankly, we have brought it here. But I want to talk about a few questions that we need to ask ourselves yet again after many years about what is it that is driving us towards this conflict with nature. Why is it that we don't value nature? What is it that we don't understand? And let me give you two small examples. A study was done some time back, which was used by my project, the United Nations project TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Diversity, which said that the total value of pollination provided by bees for crops was estimated at something like $200 billion. That is $200,000 million, which is actually around 9% or close to 1/10 of the total value of agricultural crops. Now, my question is, that's very good. Who pays for it? And has a bee ever sent you an invoice? The answer is no. This is an example of the economic invisibility of nature. A price is what you pay. Value is what you receive. The world's agricultural economy of about $300 trillion, sorry, $2.5 to $3 trillion is actually receiving a huge value from the pollination of bees, but is not paying any price because this pollination is provided for free. Another example, let us look at the world's largest rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, and let us look at the state of Amazonas, which has a large proportion of that forest. Every day, the trees in that rainforest evapotranspirate, may release water vapor into the air, and the northeastern trade winds collect that water vapor as they sweep in over the Amazonas, and they convert that to clouds as they go up the Andes, and then these clouds rain on the plains of the La Plata Basin in places like Mato Grosso, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina. And thanks to that rainfall we have in this region, one of the world's largest agricultural economies of over $250 billion worth of agricultural output. This rainfall is absolutely an essential input into this agricultural economy. And my question again is, how much does the state of Mato Grosso, or for that matter, Argentina or Uruguay or Paraguay, pay to the state of Amazonas in Brazil, from where most of this water vapor and rainfall is coming, thanks to its rainforest? And once again, the answer is nothing. Another case of the economic invisibility of nature. You see, we all use nature because she's valuable, and we all lose nature because she doesn't charge for her services, gives them all for free. Why are we like this? Why can't we understand the difference between price and value? I'll give you my third and my last example of a modern sounding economist who said that some things are worth a lot. In other words, they have high value in exchange, but they have low utility, low value in use, like a diamond, for instance. And he said other things are worth a lot in terms of usefulness, like water, but they have very low value in exchange, like water. And this is known as the diamond water paradox. And by the way, this modern sounding funky economist is none other than Adam Smith, a professor of moral economy of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow way back more than 240 years ago. So the founding father of economics actually understood what we modern men and women do not understand, which is that we have to respect and value things which do not necessarily carry a price. Value is different than price. Price is what you pay, value is what you receive. They're not necessarily the same, especially when it comes to public goods. What is a public good and what is public wealth? Well, public health is part of public wealth. I think we all know that. Countries which have good public health services have done better, people have died less, have suffered less, and countries which have poor public health services, and it doesn't matter whether they are rich or poor countries, that seems to be a different equation. Those with poor public health services have suffered, including in the US, which is not a poor country. So clearly the extent of public health in a country per capita does make a difference to the well-being of the individual, which is what finally our economy is here to try and promote. And yet we don't understand that. You need to invest in public wealth just as you need to invest in private wealth. Because human well-being doesn't come from just one kind of capital. Capital is nothing but an economic metaphor for value, by the way, right? So financial capital is an economic metaphor. It's basically finance. Natural capital is an economic metaphor for the value that nature provides to us. Human capital is an economic metaphor for the skills and the intelligence that is in our heads and the health that we have, which enable us to earn incomes over life. And social capital is all about the value of relationships, both the official formal institutions like law and order, constitutions, taxation systems, and so on, police systems, and informal institutions like trust, mutual respect, communal harmony. And without social capital, none of the other capitals, that is produced capital, human capital, and natural capital, can deliver incomes to human beings, and that will diminish their well-being. So human well-being, if seen from the lens of economics, from the lens of capitals, actually has four components. And yet all our systems, all our thinking, our policies, our behaviors are so fixated on the mesmerizing magic of markets that we seem to be unable to understand that it's not only things that have a price that have a value. Look at the work at home of homemakers, right? Be they women or men. Homemakers, huge value. Do they get paid for it? There's no price on that. So this is the whole challenge, that we have to change our mindsets to understand the way that an economy is structured and functions cannot merely be to the optimization of financial capital, of which the largest generation is, of course, the private sector. In today's economy, 2/3 of the economy measured in terms of GDP or jobs is private sector. And essentially, if you look at GDP, it is about profits plus salaries plus net rents plus net interest. Lots of different things are added up to generate an answer for GDP. But the big thing there is salaries and profits. So the role of the corporation today is absolutely central. And one of the key reasons why we still do not have the green economy that we all want, that we all desire, the inclusive green economy, which distributes incomes well and which protects the environment and keeps us safe. The reason we don't have that is because its engine, the private sector, which is 2/3 of that economy, is driving in the wrong direction. We want to drive in a direction which keeps us secure from collision with planetary boundaries. We don't want a climate catastrophe. We don't want biodiversity loss. We don't want water scarcity. We don't want pollutants to cause huge conflicts and damage to human health. We don't want any of that, and yet that's exactly what happens time and time again. Because we are allowing the engine that drives the economy and its impacts to move us in the direction pointing in one direction only, which is that of maximizing profits. We are not thinking about maximizing human capital or maximizing natural capital or maximizing social capital. We are not thinking about that. We are focused entirely on profits, which is an aspect of financial capital. So Do we or do we not have a design problem? I think we have. I think we have a design problem of monumental proportions. So that's the bad part of it, the bad news. The good news is we know where the problem is. And you know what? We have the capacity to fix it. Today's systems require today's corporations, which are 2/3 of the economy, basically to report financial profits. The key number, which comes when you look at your Bloomberg screen or your CNN screen, the key numbers that everyone is watching out for is earnings. Everyone's on the phones and looking at glued to screens. What are the earnings reports? How much profits does this company or that company make? And based on that, of course, the market will go up or down. That seems to be our focus. It's all about profits. And that cannot be our focus. We have to report corporate performance. We have to respond to corporate performance. And we have to reward bonuses to CEOs and to the senior officials, not just because they maximize profits, but because they maximize value. And value is not just profits. Value consists of increases in human capital, natural capital, social capital, and financial capital. Our well-being and the capitals in which it reflects are in 4 dimensions. And we, brilliant people that we are measuring only 1 dimension of value. That is produced capital, financial capital. Right? How can that be? We need a lens to measure all 4 dimensions of capital, not just 1. And by the way, once again, that lens is available. So we need to be able to measure the performance of companies, the engines of our economy, in 4 dimensions, and we can do that. There is something called the integrated profit and loss, which looks at changes in human, social, and natural capital as a result of the operations of the company and its value chain. And several dozen companies have actually done this already, and they have done so successfully. So our key point of change, in fact, is to change the way performance is measured. As people, as business people, as policymakers, we have a tendency to manage what we measure. And what we do not measure, we do not manage. Today, we are not measuring performance in any except 1 dimension of capital. And therefore, all we are achieving is an increase in profits of companies and at the huge expense of social, human, and natural capital. This cannot go on, right? COVID is a huge tragedy, and it has struck us in a manner that nobody expected. Hopefully, there will be a vaccine found soon enough, which will be able to give us the cure for COVID-19. Unfortunately, there is no vaccine that is a cure for climate disaster, climate breakdown, which is happening right now, even as we speak. Neither is there a cure, neither is there a vaccine that can somehow restore biodiversity if we lose biodiversity, which is the very fabric of the living fabric of our planet. And biodiversity is the term that refers to ecosystems, it refers to species, and it refers to genes. And you need to look at the extent of ecosystems, the abundance of species, and the population of genes. And you also need to look at their variability, their variety, and their diversity. All of this needs to be looked at and understood and conserved, because even though these things in nature generate public goods and services, ecosystems generate water regulation and carbon storage, there are no markets for these things. Species will give you pollination, and I just described there is no market price for pollination. And genes give you disease resistance and adaptive capacity. And again, there's no markets for adaptive capacity or disease resistance. But guess what happens if you don't have disease resistance, right? You need to conserve these important, valuable elements of nature, which are the reason why we are able to live in the planet that we have inherited from earlier generations. We need to pass on to future generations a planet as habitable, if not more habitable, than the planet that we have today. We can only do that if we start changing the way we measure performance. Firstly, changing the way we measure performance of companies. In other words, not just private profits, but also public losses and public profits. In other words, let's look at the 4 dimensions of capital. And by the way, literally today, and that's why I'm so pleased with this World Environment Day, my own company just launched a platform. We've been doing this calculation for years, for more than a decade, for various leading companies in sustainability. Today, you can log in and actually do this on a system. It does not take months, it takes a short time. And even more pleased because we have announced a collaboration with the International Chamber of Commerce, whose concern, as our concern, is that there is too little to help the small and medium enterprises to actually become sustainable. The small and medium enterprise, the SME as it's known, is 2/3 of the private sector, and the private sector is 2/3 of the economy. So roughly half of the global output of the planet is actually coming from the SME. Everyone talks about SMEs, but nobody does anything about it. And that is why my firm and my colleagues and I have decided that we will do our bit. Instead of just making typically a nice platform for big companies to make some money, we made a nice platform, a separate one, for small companies, which makes it a lot easier for them to do exactly the same. And I'm very proud to be associated with and a partner of the International Chamber of Commerce, who has promised to take this platform out and roll it out to their 45 million members. The time for change is now. All of us, each of us, can do something about it. Please, not just for us, but also, I will say, to your politicians. For decades, they have been measuring performance wrongly as well. It's not just the private sector. GDP, which is a single numeraire which measures an economy's performance, has been used again and again. But all that GDP measures is value addition to the economy. It doesn't measure the change in the quality of your natural assets or the change in the intelligence or health of your human assets or the change in the relationships between you as a society. It doesn't measure, basically, most of the things that matter most to human beings. And we can't keep doing that. So we need to change these measurement systems. And the good news is that the ways of changing them are right here with us. We have something from the United Nations called the Inclusive Wealth Report. The United Nations Environment Programme is a proud partner of this process since 2012. Please, my plea to governments is start using it. We have from small companies like mine, something called the Integrated Profit and Loss. Our own system, I360X, as we call it, Impact 360X, that measures the impacts in all 4 dimensions, has been launched just today. So companies can have the way of doing this. When we start measuring the right things, we will start managing them, and we will be able to generate a sustainable economy, an economy which improves wealth for all human beings, not just for the rich, but also for the poor, an economy which thrives on maintaining and building natural capital, an economy which uses and respects human capital, an economy which is bound together by relationships, social capital. That, my friends, is a green and inclusive economy of permanence. That's what we all want, and that's what we all deserve. Let's put our hands together and move in that right direction for us and for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pavan Sukhdev. I understand now why you are called the ecological economist. And thank you for bringing us such a holistic approach. For viewers watching this, you mentioned many ways of measuring, and I would like to ask you after this broadcast, when you're finished, because I know you're speaking at the UN event just shortly, to please bring us some of these links so we can share that with our viewers and our followers. Because this is very useful information for many people all over the world watching this. You talk a lot about corporations and SMEs, smaller corporations. How about other actors in society, civil society, academia? Who should be collaborating? Because we talk a lot about collaboration, and we don't have time. How could these different actors collaborate stronger, better, to get these new measurements in place? Because we really need to measure differently, right?
You're absolutely right. And in fact, each of the 2 groups that you mentioned, governments, and then so each 3 groups, governments, the NGOs, and the academicians, do have important roles to play. And let me very briefly, in the absence of time, governments have to change policies, but they have to change policies to assist the new economy to arrive. Today, if we look at subsidies, there's almost $1 trillion per year of subsidies for fossil fuels, for unsustainable agriculture, for unsustainable fisheries, and so on. That's got to stop. Policies have to change. So they do have a role, but they have to do it on the basis of good information. And it is the academicians who have to provide that information. When today academicians try and analyze the performance of agriculture, they look at per hectare productivity of single crops. That's wrong. Agriculture is not just about growing single crops. It's about providing 1.3 billion jobs to small farmers less than 2 hectares. It's about providing nutritious food to people like you and me. It's about ensuring that soil is conserved. It's about ensuring that water is used less, and that can be done. It's about ensuring that it's carbon positive and not carbon negative. So, in other words, it absorbs carbon and does not emit carbon dioxide. All of this is possible. But our policies don't do that because our academicians are not giving them the right signals. Now we can. There is a project called the TEEB for Agriculture and Food Project. I'll send you the links on that, which can do it. And finally, when it comes to the NGOs, whose job is it to convince people of what they need to know? Surely it is the job of the NGOs. It is for them to advocate the right solutions. They are not in the interests of their private profits. Their job is to work with people and for people. So communicating all these ideas, these solutions, truly is the job of the NGOs, and therefore they are in. So you see, actually, we are all involved in this, not least the companies who need to take leadership and realize that the corporation today is not merely a machine to make money for shareholders, like Milton Friedman said. It's not. It is the single most important institution of our society. We need to recognize that we have responsibility to people, to the societies in which we operate. We are not merely machines for shareholders. That whole idea is bunkum, and it's time that we accepted that it is and moved on.
Well, thank you for spelling it out so clearly. Biodiversity, the connection and the importance of addressing biodiversity when it comes to climate change. Could you please share your insights on this topic?
Absolutely, and the two are deeply connected. Thank you for bringing that out. When it comes to biodiversity, firstly, some of the biggest risks to biodiversity come from climate change. A mere fraction of a degree increase on average temperatures could convert the Amazon rainforest, which is the heart of the water cycle, which feeds the water cycle of the planet, could get converted to savanna. And that's a real risk that many scientists have been writing about of late. And on the flip side, when it comes to capturing carbon back into biomass and then through that into the soils, in fact, the same biodiversity, the ecosystems that we are talking about, whether it's the seagrasses in the seabeds or whether it is the rainforests of the Amazon or Indonesia, these are the places where the maximum, the most efficient and the cheapest form of carbon capture can take place. People keep talking to me, the scientists keep talking about carbon capture technology. And I remind them, there is a carbon capture technology. It's more than 1 billion years old. It's called a tree. Just try it out. That is true. Okay.
Thank you. You talked about the pandemic, and is there anything we could learn from how the companies and the governments have been handling the pandemic when it comes to addressing the larger crisis for humanity,
Yes.
which of course is the climate crisis and the crisis connected to biodiversity?
And you know that the pandemic and the collaboration that you mentioned between people and companies and governments, I think that's a great example of how in some places and in some societies, companies did collaborate with the governments to actually volunteer to give up. And in sometimes, like for instance, many engineering firms and construction firms carry massive stores of masks because they need that, the face masks for personal protective equipment. They actually voluntarily gave those extra masks across to the health services to address the short supply that was clearly taking place and harming professionals working in health. So that's a great example of the private sector stepping forward, expressing responsibility for the society in which it operates, than trying to extract the last drop of profit, which would be, oh, I've got a nice store of masks. Let me see how I can sell it for 10 times the price of which I got it for, the cost. Right? So, and by the way, that also happened. There were people who were hoarding masks to sell them on websites and stuff or a profit. So there are both types of behaviors. You can be behaving as if you believe in stakeholder capitalism, or behaving as you believe, which sadly is still majority today, shareholder capitalism. And that goes back to my point about flipping across from corporations behaving like machines to make money for shareholders and behaving more like engines of society, creating value for stakeholders.
At this time and place, we could say it's a sort of a still point for the economy. And we have not really had a common problem to address, maybe since the Second World War. What do you think this is doing to our perception of us as a global community? Is there any benefits? Could there be any deeper understanding of how we are interconnected and how we are interconnected with nature in a deeper, more profound manner?
There absolutely can be, and I think if there is a silver lining to the cloud that is COVID and the huge loss of lives that it has resulted in, and by the way, the stress and the poverty that it will generate as a result of the recession that follows, if there is a silver lining, it is this: that we would have elevated humankind to a different level of understanding. We need to now understand that this connection, this bond between us and nature, is truly fundamental to our well-being and our future existence and for future generations. We need to understand that we need to behave differently towards nature by first recognizing that our current design, we have a huge design problem when it comes to the corporation, which is the engine of our economy. We need to redesign that, and step one of that redesign is exactly what we've discussed, which is how do you measure performance? what do you ascribe as success? It can't just be profits. And then after that, we will realize, oh, how have we been behaving? Today, one of the scientists, the doctors tell us that some of the most important comorbidities of the coronavirus, which are basically heart disease, lung disease, and diabetes. And heart disease and lung disease, the main reason for that is actually cigarette smoking and vaping nowadays. So 7 million people every year die as a result of tobacco. And yet today, tobacco's use is not illegal. It's a business, in fact, a very profitable business. Banks finance that business still. Some banks, some don't. So what have we learned about that? If we want to stop the damage impact of the coronavirus, if we want to have less cases of COVID-19, we need to encourage people to stop smoking, to stop using tobacco. This is part of the education that we need to communicate to people. So there's a lot to be learned, actually. The number of lessons that we can learn from COVID-19, if we recognize the silver lining, are many. But I would say these are two vitally important ones: personal behaviors and how do we reorganize, redesign the corporation.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's the holistic approach, the holistic way of looking at how everything is interconnected. I would like to ask you to take on a role as a sort of a prophet now. Go into the future. If we would meet here again in 5 years on World Environment Day, what will have happened in terms of what we've been speaking about here today: biodiversity, ecological economics? What do you think? I didn't prepare you for this question, but I'm sure you can answer it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I have a vision and I have a dream, and I should be allowed to dream. But I dream that when we meet in 5 years' time, and I'm saying when rather than if, that we'll be looking at a very different world, and we'll be smiling at each other and nodding in wisdom and saying that, well, yes, it was terrible, COVID-19 and the coronavirus really did change things. But hey, today people are healthier. We don't have companies just behaving as if they are machines making money, but actually they're part of society. They're behaving as what they actually are, the single largest institution of our time. We have them collaborating and working with governments, paying taxes rather than avoiding taxes and evading taxes in some cases. And we have people behaving as if it's not the only thing that matters is the color of your skin or the passport that you carry in your hands. But actually, whether you are a human being and whether you respect each other and whether you can live with and work with each other in collaboration. And we learned all of this because of this rude shock that we got, which is that all of our hubris, all of our current thinking as to what is the relationship between people and between people and nature got destroyed by a teensy-weensy virus that came along one fine day in Wuhan or wherever it was. That's what I hope we'll be discussing.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Pavan Sukhdev, for your wisdom, for sharing it with us here in the studio and globally on this broadcast. And now I know you're moving on to take part. You're being a moderator on one of the events here at the United Nations broadcast. So best of luck, and thank you again for your wonderful work and for coming to us on the broadcast.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.